Hello and welcome back to Posted. We are on number 13, which is getting pretty far. We're almost halfway through the book. So when we left off, they had done the gauntlet. Didn't go well for poor Evan. And right now, they're noticing that there's Post-it notes on some of the lockers. At least Dee Dee has noticed that. And he noticed that they were on Missy Upton, the cheerleader's locker. I saw six others as I walked in this morning, Dee Dee said. Don't you know what this means? Maybe that Missy S. Upton hadn't been to her locker yet? It means, Dee Dee said, sticking his granola bar in my face, that we started something, like a sticky note thing, a communications revolution like Alexander Graham Bell inventing the telephone. Dee Dee was delusional. I put a hand on his shoulder. Whatever, man, we need to get to class. You don't believe me. It's one note on one locker that hardly qualifies as a revolution, I said. On the way, though, I saw a kid whose name I couldn't remember leave another sticky note on another locker, a lopsided heart and swirly black marker. It had initials on it and an arrow shot through the center. Since when did pierced vital organs become a symbol for love? See, Dee Dee said, I told you, tugging on my arm. I shrugged. I mean, it was kind of weird. People beside us using sticky notes like that, but no weirder than the two sixth graders who were about to snort chocolate milk up their nose on the bus that morning. Middle school was a breeding ground for random behavior. I think it's just a coincidence, I said. But I spotted two more notes before we even made it to class. We also passed Evan Smalls, his right wrist wrapped up tight, limping with every step. I thought about telling him he had a good run at least, except there's nothing I could say that would make him feel better about lip-smacking a tree trunk. I settled for a nod instead. I stepped into Mr. Sword's class to find my seat taken, the seat beside Wolf, the one that I had sat in every day since the beginning of the year. Rose stood up as soon as she saw me. I was keeping it warm for you, she said as I came over. Wolf laughed, and I wondered if this was some kind of joke at my expense. I looked around and I saw a few other students watching us. Jason Baker had his tongue in his cheek, one eyebrow cocked. Supervillain facial accompaniment to the phrase, well, 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 what have we here? I just ignored him. I'm sure I'm going to hear about this later. As she passed me, Rose whispered in my ear, try not to melt. Try not to melt, keeping it warm. Oh, Frosty the Snowman, I get it. I sat down slowly and watched Rose head back to her usual place. Cameron Cole whispered something to Noah Kyle behind us. There was zero doubt in my mind that it was about me, and I told myself I didn't care. We were just talking, Wolf said. I nodded. My seat was actually warm. I was about to ask what exactly they had been chatting about when Mr. Sword bustled in with a big stack of paperbacks and started passing them down the rows. The class immediately hushed, not because we were being polite or anything, but because the man was wearing a toga. You could see his usual sweater and pant combo on underneath, but the toga was the sort of thing that gets a class's attention. It's Shakespeare time, Mr. Sword said with way too much enthusiasm. The collective groan could be heard clear in the other wing of the school. The copy of Julius Caesar landed on my desk. The picture on the cover at least looked promising. Bloody daggers and a dead body. Still, I could think of about 147 other writers I'd rather spend 2 weeks with. Supposedly, Mr. Sword taught Julius Caesar every year. Maybe it was mandated on the curriculum, or maybe he just liked it that much. He did his own toga. Dee Dee leaned over to Wolf and me and said, Caesar dies. We don't need to read that now. I slapped the book against my desk with mock irritation. The cover and an ancient history kind of thing spoiled it before Dee Dee even could. I read the spark notes already, Dee Dee continued. They all conspire against him and stab him, but it's all right because the people who murder him end up killing themselves. Oh, great, thanks for ruining it, I said. That makes it all better. Wolf didn't say anything. I had no idea what he was thinking or even if he was listening. He laughed, and that's when I realized he was reading something sprawled on a note that he had hidden in his lap beneath his desk. Judging by the handwriting, I guessed it was from Rose. Back at the front of the class, Mr. Sword started in on the history of ancient Rome, necessary background for understanding what we were about to read. He put several names on the board. Julius Caesar, Marcus Brutus, Gaius Cassius Longus. Gaius Longus? Seriously? Cameron whispered. I think it's pronounced Gaius, moron, I heard Amanda Shockey say. That girl almost always had a book in her hand, although hardly ever the one that Mr. Sword assigned to us. She also didn't care much about what anybody else thought. I was tempted to give her a high five. I mean, it's always nice when guys like Cameron are called out, not that it ever stops them. To prove my point, Jason Baker put his hand up. Yes, Jason, Mr. Sword said. Well, weren't the guys, into guys or something? Over my shoulder, I could see he was having a hard time keeping a straight face. Beside him, Noah Cal snorted, trying not to laugh. Mr. Sword gave them both a puzzled look. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking here. Jason lowered his hand and slumped. It's all right, forget it. Mr. Sword paused for a moment, jaw working back and forth, maybe deciding he should press the issue. Instead, he took a deep breath and continued with his lecture over the expansion of the Roman Empire and Caesar's rise to power. I only half paid attention because I was trying to see what was written on the note that Wolf was reading, and that's when I saw Jason lean over Wolf's shoulder. Most days, they were interchangeable. Jason and Noah and Cameron, at least as far as I was concerned. You would figure one of them would give you a hard time, but you never would know who. But with Wolf, it always seemed to be Jason. When in Rome, he whispered. Am I right, Morgan? Wolf just kept on reading, but I saw his face turn red. He folded the note in half and tucked it away. Knock it off, I snapped. Jason leaned back in his chair, grinning. Mr. Sword was eyeing us, so I faced forward again, glancing sideways at Wolf to make sure he was okay. He stared at the front of the room with his fists in his lap. Mr. Sword held up his copy of the play and asked us, So are you all ready to get bloody? Judging by the lukewarm response and the murmuring and the yawns of first period English, the answer was not really. But it didn't matter whether we were ready or not. This was Shakespeare, and getting bloody was in the script. Over the next 3 periods, multiple sticky note sightings confirmed Dee Dee's suspicion. We really had started something. Not on purpose, of course, but the ripple effect was undeniable. The yellow notes sprouted like weeds. It wasn't completely out in the open yet, though. Most of the notes were still passed under desks or palmed and transferred via high five. Some were left on backpacks or attached to shoulders in passing. I saw 2 traded in English, another foreign social studies under Mr. Hostler's nearsighted eyes. I saw quite a few more posted in the hallways. Most of them were innocent, smiley faces and questions about weekend plans. This wasn't the start of the war so much as the build-up of arms. I did spot one plant foot here with an arrow pointing at a butt. Attached to the back of Winston Furman, a kid who was perpetually teased for being 2 grades ahead in math. I was going to tell him what was sticking to him, but by the time I had made up my mind, he had already turned the corner. The note would probably fall off on his own before anybody followed the instructions anyway, right? Not surprisingly, there was a note on my locker as I went to go drop off my books before lunch, and this note had Dee Dee written all over it. It said, Viva la Revolution. I tucked the sticky note in the copy of Julius Caesar, thinking it would make a fitting bookmark, and then I met up with Bench on the way to lunch. Did you see? See what? He asked. All the sticky notes are showing up everywhere. Yeah, I saw some. Bench's tone was clipped and preoccupied. Dee Dee thinks we started something, I pressed. Well, Dee Dee believes in UFO and government mind control, Bench reminded me. In other words, you couldn't always believe everything Dee Dee wanted you to. We walked down the B hall, and I searched for a single sticky note to point out to Bench, but of course, by the time you got around to showing somebody something, it's always gone. We got to the cafeteria, and I started in, but I stopped when I realized Bench wasn't behind me. He was standing in the entrance, as immovable as the Francis B. Stockbridge statue. Get in there, you big furry oaf. I don't care what you smell, I coaxed. You never can go wrong with Wookiee humor. But Bench shrugged me off, and he actually brushed my hand off his shoulder. It's all right, you go in. I'm not hungry, he said, his voice flat. I turned up my hands, a universal gesture for what gives. This was Bench, the same kid who once bet me he could eat $15 worth of Taco Bell in one sitting, costing me 2 weeks of allowance and him a record number of trips to the bathroom. He was always hungry. I looked back over my shoulder, finding our table by the wall, and that's when I saw 3 seats were taken. I'm no Winston Furman, but I can do the math. Seriously, you're not coming to lunch because of her? I kept my voice low. Suddenly, this had become one of those conversations, the kind you don't want other people to hear. Ben shook his head and whispered back, I told you I'm not hungry. I think I'll just get a pass to the computer lab or something. Dude, it's 20 minutes. You have to eat. Besides, I added tentatively, she's not that bad. It was about as far as I was willing to go, at least with Bench. I wasn't about to defend Rose's honor or anything. I wasn't anybody's champion. I just wanted him to come and sit with us like he always did. But he was having none of it. He pulled me aside, out of the doorway and out of view. You don't get it, he said. The other guys again? Maybe the ones on the team, the one he warmed the seats for? They call her Moose. I craned my neck around the door, and I looked across the filling station at Rose Holland, who was at least 3 inches taller than Wolf. Shoulders you could park a car on, and that face, those large, luminous eyes. If faces were states, she would be Montana, and those eyes would be full bright moons. Moose, I didn't want to, but I could see it. I never said it, Bench said. I mean, it's not like I got anything against her, really. It's just, when people talk like that. I could hear it in his voice. It wasn't just Moose. They said other stuff, worse stuff Bench didn't want to tell me, and I didn't want to ask. Or part of me did, but I knew it would just feel worse for knowing. Other kids brushed past us, squeezing through the door in the cafeteria. Bench gave me a pat on the back, or maybe it was a shove. I'll just catch up with you later. And before I could argue with him any more, he turned away and started back down the hallway. I waited by myself in the lunch line. "Where's Bench?" Dee Dee asked when I finally took the seat next to him. I suspected they all saw us in the doorway and wondered if they registered Bench's hesitation, the traded whispers, his unexpected retreat. "He said he wasn't feeling well," I lied. "I think he might go to the nurse's office." I looked at Wolf. He was studying me, trying to unpack all the stuff I wasn't saying. So I examined my grilled cheese instead, the waxy oozing between two pieces of soggy bread. Suddenly, I wasn't that hungry either. And we're going to stop there. Until next time.